We'll get underway. Someone from the Blue Mountains, good morning to you, John. All right, folks, we're very excited to have this webinar today, Making Friends in Older Age. And of course, for many of us during especially the COVID time, we heard some very sad stories of people feeling very lonely, people losing connection with friends, sadly people losing loved ones because of COVID. So the issue of loneliness and social connections always been very important to the advocacy work that COTA New South Wales does and will continue to do. So my name is Joan Hughes. I'm the President of Council on the Ageing New South Wales, and it's great to see so many people join us today for this webinar, Making Friends in Older Age. Today we are joined by Dr. Ray King, the co-founder of Older Men New Ideas Social Group, and Dr. Jasmine Chen, a PhD, a postdoctoral research fellow and senior clinical psychologist at the university called Macquarie University. And the area that Jasmine works in is Macquarie University Lifespan Health and Wellbeing Research Centre. This is the second time that Jasmine has participated in a COTA New South Wales webinar, and we thank you again for your ongoing support of this important topic. So, do we need to keep making friends? Well, of course we do. And if you read any literature about this topic, you'll find that loneliness, it's a bit of a worldwide pandemic, really, in a way, because I noticed that an article I read just recently in the UK, it's become such a big topic there that they even have a minister for loneliness. And we don't want people as they age and towards the end of their life, we don't want them to be lonely. We don't want them to be sad. So today, get your pens and paper ready, and I'm sure you're going to get a whole lot of different ideas from our wonderful speakers. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where we all meet, and I thank our people that have joined us and already made comment about the First Nations land that they live on. Our office in Sydney is on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any First Nations people who are with us today. For those of you who don't know, but I've met most of you do out there, COTA New South Wales stands for Council of the Ageing. We are the peak body for people over 50 in New South Wales. We do a lot of policy and advocacy work with the policymakers, that's our politicians, with service providers, with the media, not to just make sure that the views of older people are heard, but most importantly that they're acted on. We have a very small team, and I think we do remarkable work for the small team that are in our office. We run a range of programs, and we were lucky to have Ray with us because he started, I believe, Older Men New Ideas, and so we want to hear more about the importance of men being connected in different models of support. We run a community speakers program and pop-up peer information hubs. Now, folks, just a bit of housekeeping. Everyone except the presenters, you're all on mute out there, and you can't unmute yourself, the word of the century, because this is a webinar, it's not a meeting. So you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A panel, and we ask you to put any questions there. Make sure your questions are respectful, keep them short, and I'll try and I'll try and keep an eye on all of those questions. And if there are themes, of course, we'll ask Ray and Jasmine to make some comment. There's also a chat panel where you can make comment during the presentation. To let everyone know, this webinar is being recorded like all of our webinars. And once the webinar is finished today, we put it up on COTA New South Wales's YouTube channel. Isn't that exciting? We have our own YouTube channel, and so you can refer your friends and relatives and neighbours to watch the webinar if they haven't been able to join us today. And if you want to watch it again, well, it's there, as well as all our other webinars about topics that are important for older people. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes. I won't take too much time away from our speakers, but I've just moved out of Sydney and moved to regional New South Wales, and I do love it. But, I've always had friends in my life. They've always been really important to me. I've had colleagues that have been really important to me. And now that I'm not in the paid workforce, I realise those social connections are even more important. So when I came to this area, my husband and I, we joined the Heart Foundation's walking group. It's fantastic. Seriously, we walk 5 days a week. Start at 8 o'clock, finish around 8:45, have a cup of coffee. That's really an important part of the whole process. And I've met the most amazing people. And, it's not just the physical exercise, but as soon as my husband and I come back home, we just feel better. We feel better for 2 reasons: that we've done a bit of physical exercise, that our dog has had a walk. There's 3 reasons, really. Our dog's had a walk, we've had physical exercise, but most importantly, we've been able to chat with people, and everyone's got a story. Seriously, I just think it's remarkable. It's a really simple, it's a very easy group to join. We have people, our eldest person, Fred, he's 95. But I think the average age, and I don't ask people their age, of course, Fred's told me how old he is, and he's a fantastic man. But I think the average age probably 75 to 80. Some people have had all sorts of things happen in their lives. But, as soon as someone in that group is unwell, or if they've lost a partner, or if they celebrate their birthday, that whole group comes together. And I think, that outcome or that result from people being connected every day is just remarkable. And it's pretty simple. And I just am so pleased that we found that group to join. And I just recommend it to anyone, even if in your area you find those walking groups, sometimes through your local council, through the Heart Foundation. There's a whole lot of organisations that run walking groups, and it's the social connection, I think, that has the most amazing impact on people's health and well-being. So that's my little story, and I'm raising the flag for the Heart Foundation walking group. So recommend it highly. All right, Jasmine, let's get underway. So Dr. Chen, as I said, is a postdoctoral research fellow and senior clinical psychologist at Macquarie University's Lifespan Health and Wellbeing Research Centre. She's going to share with us her current research, which is focused on the clinical trial of psychological interventions, and very much about improving social connections in later life on mental health outcomes. She's very passionate about mental health education, and we're very lucky to have her with us today. So over to you, Jasmine.
Thank you so much, Joan, and for this introduction, and thank you so much again for having me back to this fabulous webinar. And it's so great to be back with you all. And good morning, hello everyone from Sydney. And so before I begin, I would just like to acknowledge the Wallumadga clan of the Darug Nation, who are the traditional custodians on the land where I'm presenting today. So I would just like to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, including everyone attending this webinar today. Okay. Oops. And so as Joan mentioned, I am a practitioner, a research practitioner with a particular interest in understanding and improving mental health in later life, particularly focusing on anxiety and low mood. And one aspect of my research is also focused on understanding how we can improve the quality of the social connections in later life. So this is very much a topic that I'm really passionate about. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this topic with you all today. And also because I'm going to put my clinician hat on later part of my presentation to share some tips that you may find helpful for starting or reconnecting with some of the people in your network. And also any of the resources that I'm going to mention in my presentation today, I will make sure that I share the links with the webinar organizer after the webinar today. And also I will share a copy of my slides today as well. So don't worry if you can't jot down everything that I'm going to discuss in my presentation today. All right, so let me share my screen with you now. Let's see. All right. Okay. Now, can I maybe just get a thumbs up from Joan if you can see my slide? Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I thought I'll just quickly introduce the organisation that I'm part of, that is the Macquarie University Lifespan Health and Wellbeing Research Centre. And so we are a multidisciplinary group of researchers who are really passionate about developing evidence-based approaches to understanding and maximising psychological, social health and well-being from infancy to older adulthood. So we're very much focusing on this lifespan approach to how we can better improve our well-being and health. And so our centre provides research, legal support, policy and strategic advice on some of the prevention and management of emotional, cognitive and social health challenges across the lifespan. So we're particularly interested in looking at in terms of emotional health and well-being. We're also focusing on cognitive health, including dementia in the older adult space. We're also interested in social health and well-being, how the systems and the frameworks and also the institutional well-being for both on an individual and also on a collective level, population health level across the lifespan. So with that in mind, I'm of course going to focus on, the topic that I'm really passionate about, which is all about social connections. Okay, so I'm sure it's not a surprise to everyone here that we know that social connectedness is very much closely associated with mental health. And because we now know from the research that that's coming out from the last 20 years, in particularly suggesting that compared to people who maintain frequent and meaningful social connections, we know that people with poor social connections are usually at higher risk of loneliness, cognitive decline, suicidal thoughts, and even death. So we also know that poor social connections are associated with decreased quality of life, worse physical and mental health outcomes. Okay, and so the association of social connections with mental health is particularly important in later life. So we know that in older adulthood, when we engage in more frequent social activities or memberships in, across a number of different groups, whether that's religious or social or community groups, these activities and engagements are related to better mental health, physical health, and also reduced cognitive decline. And that would also include volunteering, which there is some evidence showing that volunteering is associated with better how we think about our health, well-being, and also satisfaction with life, as well as reduced mortality, depression, and also reduced use of healthcare services. And in fact, in the Harvard study for adult development, we now know that, having stronger connections to family, friends, and wider community at the age of 50 is actually very strongly a predictive factor for happier and healthier well-being at the age of 80. So that's really powerful information that we're seeing from the research. But it's all well and good to sort of think about the benefits of social connections, frequent and quality social connections. We also know that there are barriers for some people to developing and maintain these quality social connections in later life. Okay, so we conducted a review a couple of years ago looking at what some of the barriers and facilitating factors to developing and maintaining social connections in older adulthood. And so what we found in terms of the barriers, which in some ways might not be surprising to everyone here in terms of some of the logistical barriers, such as transport, where we live, also can have an impact on how much we're able to access social networks and the number of social groups that are available in our neighborhood, etc. We also know that there are individual factors particularly in relation to how motivated we feel and how motivated we maintain that motivation to engage in social connections can also play a very important role in maintaining meaningful social connections. Okay, so it's not just the logistical issues. We also know that individual motivations can be very important for developing and maintaining social connections. So zooming in on some of these individual factors, we now know from research that older adults with anxiety and low mood are particularly vulnerable to reduced social participation and loneliness. So that direction of, especially thinking about the relationship between social interactions and mental health, it's a little bit unclear at this stage in terms of which one causes which, etc. But it's more than likely a bi-directional relationship. So what that means is if you have low mood or anxiety, it's likely that you might not have a lot of quality social contact. And it's also possible that the distress that you experience, as a result of the infrequent social contact can also impact on your social participation. These might affect some of the symptoms of anxiety, low mood, such as irritability. You might not really feel like engaging in social participation, or just generally losing that motivation to engage in pleasant activities or things that you used to enjoy doing. Okay. It also can affect the way that you pay attention to the interactions, in the sense that you might be more likely to focus on the negative aspects of the interactions. And so we also know that, the lack of quality social interaction is likely to sort of further reinforce those feelings of worthlessness or even feeling rejected, which can then further maintain the symptoms of anxiety and low mood going over time. And so the research that we're currently conducting at Macquarie University is very much focused on understanding the relationship between mental health and social connections. And so we think that targeting both mental health and social connections is really, really important. So we've also put together a brochure for recognizing symptoms of anxiety and low mood, particularly in older adults. And as I said, I will share the link to this brochure after the webinar today. So you might have a look at these brochures and maybe even share this information with some of your friends or loved ones who you think may have been experiencing symptoms of low mood and anxiety. Okay, because I think it's one of the things that we're really passionate about is to make sure that, we're trying to help everyone to understand that it's actually not normal to be experiencing anxiety and depression as we get older, contrary to some of the stereotypes that some people might have about older adulthood. And so what that also means is that if we do start to experience anxiety and low mood, for weeks, for months, or even for years, that is actually very important to know that there is help available to address some of these issues, because they do have implications for the quality and also how often you socialize. So I put together really just a summary of the tips that you may find helpful for managing anxiety and low mood. So for example, one of the things that you can do is actually start to sort of pay attention, pay attention to the pattern of your feelings and identifying triggers for low mood and anxiety, because often our mood is affected by what we do as well as what we think, and not just the situations that we're in. So it can be helpful as a starting point to look at the pattern of the changes in our mood across the week, for example. Now, of course, as Joan has already mentioned, engaging in enjoyable activities, whether that's physical exercise groups or just generally any activities that give you a sense of pleasure, or sometimes that combines both physical activity and pleasure and social connections, that can be really helpful. So the key words here that we often emphasize is focusing on scheduling, doing activities that gives you a sense of pleasure and a sense of mastery. So that might be, feeling that you have achieved, as giving a sense of achievements So maybe that's really sort of tapping into learning a new language, for example, or taking up a new skills. So one of my favorite news columns, in fact, is in The Guardian. Some of you might have noticed that every week there is a column called A New Start at 60. And I love reading about some of the new challenges that older adults embark on, often sort of following some pretty significant changes in their life circumstances, and they decide to take up a new challenge, whether that's, weightlifting, taking up dancing, or starting a charity, etc. So I find those columns, those stories very inspiring. Now, it's also important to think about changing potentially any unhelpful thinking that you might have. Okay, so we know that when we're talking about changing unhelpful thinking, it's not simply just thinking positively. In fact, what we're more thinking about is to try to identify and challenge any potentially unhelpful thinking characteristics or habits that you might have, and try and replace them with more helpful ones. Okay. And if you're feeling really anxious about doing some of the activities or engaging in social activities, it's important to think about, how to face your fears gradually. Okay, we know that's usually one of the best things to do for overcoming anxiety. And so you might want to start by facing small fears. And then once you have gained the confidence, to start moving on to bigger fears. Now, of course, we've been talking about the idea of staying connected. And it's important to keep in mind that we want to make sure the regular social contact is with a wide variety of people, not just with one or two persons. Okay, so often we talk about, not to put all your social connection eggs in one basket, really thinking about trying to branch out a little bit more if you can. And also consider going back to doing some of the things you used to do but no longer do. That can often be a good starting point. And as we've seen, in the last 3 years, a lot of older adults have also started taking up using technology to maintain social connections. Although one caveat I would say is to make sure that you have a combination of online as well as face-to-face interactions, rather than just relying on technology, the online social connections, or thinking that until I've fixed X issue before I can go back to the face-to-face connections. It's important to think about using the technology in a flexible way, in a way that works for you, particularly taking into account any limitations or challenges that you might be dealing with, whether that's related to physical health issues or in terms of the geographical locations. Now, of course, I wanted to sort of finish up by just, again, focusing on some really quick tips for developing and maintaining friendships in later life. And so I've put together some of the barriers that we've often heard from older adults, when it comes to the idea of making friends in later life. So often we hear people telling us, I don't know how to get there. The weather's just not right. It's either too hot, it's too cold, it's too wet. It's all well and good to talk about going on a walking groups every day, but if it's too hot, it's too cold, that motivation that I was talking about earlier can really play a very big role. So again, we all have those days, in terms of not thinking, I just don't feel like doing that today, or I'll just wait until, when I feel like it. We all can relate to some of these, thinking. But the important thing is not to let these excuses or challenges in increasing the pleasant activities in social activities stop you. Okay, this is very important because to improve your mood and reducing feelings of loneliness, it's important to identify and overcome some of these barriers that could get in the way for you to get started and maintain friendships in later adulthood. So some of you might be thinking, well, I don't know how to find new activities or social groups. And so, for example, you might ask a friend what they already do. Our local councils really provide a lot of resources for connecting people in their local neighbourhood to some of the community groups. And also contact your local community health centre. They often will have a lot of information. And check out your local notice boards, for example, at the supermarket, library, community halls, or even your GP clinics. Check out your local newspaper, and also ask your GP or other health professionals, particularly other health professionals, for any information that they might have. But if you're worried about contacting a new group or going for the first time, you might want to ask, sort of think about what you want to ask before calling to inquire about the group. Okay. You could even ask them what are some of the skills are required for participating in those groups and whether they can accommodate your skill level. Okay. But also be prepared that it might take some time for you to develop your skills to match the group. Okay. And also remind yourself that you don't have to know what to do or make new friends on the first activity. Okay, so in fact, generally we'll recommend people to try a new activity at least 3 times before you decide whether the new activity or group is right for you. And if you're not having enough friends to spend quality time with, so this is probably where you might need to think in a more creative way. So, for example, it's never too late to rekindle an old friendship. Okay. So emailing a friend is a good start, but, also a telephone call, in-person contact is much better, as we know from some of the research that we've done. And also keep in mind that friendships, from some of these new activity groups that you participate in just need to take time to be fostered, and shouldn't be taken for granted. If you think back to the time, when we were at school, starting school for the first time, starting a new job for the first time, you often, take some time to build some of those friendships over time. Okay. We also sometimes encourage people to think about this idea of repairing perhaps a relationship, from the past that might have been fractured, which may not be easy and might take some time. And it may even involve some difficult conversations at first. But maybe this is also a starting point to think about reconnecting with some of the people from the past and thinking about what that might look like in the current stage. So conflicts in relationships are often much easier to manage if you have a wider variety of social connections, so you don't have to just rely on one person or social contact. All right, so the take-home message is to try to repair damaged relationships, but also try to work on building some new ones if you can. Now, very quickly, what about older adults with mild cognitive impairment or early dementia and their supporters? Okay, so there is really very few research in this space focusing on the social connections and well-being for older adults, especially for those experiencing dementia or cognitive impairment. So my colleague at Macquarie University, Dr. Diana Madovic, is currently conducting a study to better understand social connections in people with lived experience of dementia and their carers and supporters. So if you're interested, please reach out to Dr. Madovic to find out a bit more about the research that she's doing, and perhaps you might be even like to participate in her research. I've also put together some tips for dealing with motivations. I'm sort of running out of time, so I won't go through all of them. But generally, just one key point is to really identify, some of the perhaps unhelpful thoughts that might be maintaining the low motivation, and really thinking about starting small and gradually increase the activities. All right. So finally, the program that Joan mentioned that we're currently offering at Macquarie University is a free treatment program for older adults who are currently experiencing low mood, anxiety, worrying and loneliness. So treatment is available face-to-face if you're in Sydney, but it's also available via telehealth, via video conference or telephone. Again, I will put up our contact information at the end if you're interested in finding out a little bit more. And of course, on the slides, you will see that I put together some information, some potential starting points to contact and reach out if you need to seek professional help to address anxiety and low mood. Well, that may be a barrier for you to develop and maintain friendships in older adulthood. So just to finish up, it's important to do regular activities with other people, but it's also important thinking about branching out. Okay, use technology for online as well as face-to-face social interactions if you need to. And really, my hope for you today is that after the webinar today, you might be inspired to start thinking about joining a new group. And finally, just acknowledge the researchers who have been collaborating on some of the resources that I mentioned earlier. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I've got my contact information here. And as I said, I will share the links to some of the resources that I mentioned today. Thank you very much.
Jasmine, thank you. Thank you so much. So much information to take in such a short time, but you presented it in a way that I think lots of people who have joined us today will be able to pick up on those practical ideas and the barriers. And I think a key message about go slow, don't expect things to change overnight. It does take some time if you've been a little disconnected from society and from your neighbourhood and friends. So some great tips. Jasmine also put up a mental health number there, a 1-800 number, but just folks out there, if any of the comments today bring up any issues for you, don't forget that you can contact Lifeline as well on 13 11 14. We've just got a couple of ideas that have come through. So folks, please put ideas through the Q&A or through the chat. Someone has mentioned Probus groups. One of our community speakers that's connected to COTA New South Wales joined us and had changed his life, and also he joined Probus. So that's another good group to join. And there's plenty of Probuses around New South Wales. We also, someone said something about when is the recording going to be available? Yes, this is being recorded, as I said, and the recording will be available in a couple of days' time. And the people who've joined us today, you'll get an alert about that recording, so you can listen and watch it again. And please send it off to your friends and relatives and anyone you know that would benefit from the practical information today. And I just noted that we have someone from Singapore who's just joined us. So welcome, Lily. That's terrific. I think it might be the first time we've had someone from overseas. Anyway, look, it gives me a great honour, Ray, to introduce you and COTA New South Wales. We've been working with Ray, who is the co-founder of Older Men New Ideas. It's a social group for men over 50. Ray's got a similar background to myself, started off as a school teacher and taught in country schools and qualified as a registered psychologist. He took up lectureship at the University of Sydney in 1971 and gained his doctorate through Cambridge in the UK. And Michigan. He retired from Sydney University as an associate professor and accepted a visiting professorship at Charles Sturt University. His list goes on and on of what amazing things he's done in his life. But Ray, we welcome you to talk with us about why you decided to establish Omni. Why is it important for older men to stay connected? So over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. There seems to be a little bit of difficulty with the internet here. I'm getting bits and pieces. I want to recognise that I'm on Wiradjuri country here in Wagga Wagga, and pay my respects to the Wiradjuri elders, past, present and emerging. I also like to thank Dr. Jen for her presentation, which I found very fascinating, interesting, and very much fits in with the kinds of things that I've been doing as well. I start with three principles, or three theses, I suppose. The first one is that loneliness is endemic in Australia and in lots of other countries, allied countries such as America and England. And the research seems to show that about a third of the people over 65 are in a condition of loneliness or have been. My next point is that older men are more at risk of loneliness than women. And my third point is that the solution to all of this is membership in small peer groups. Now, I've been introduced to someone who started Omni, but in actual fact, Omni was started as a program of COTA in 1996, when COTA became aware of loneliness and isolation of older men, and started a number of groups in the metropolitan area comprising older men. And these were very successful. And we started in the Riverina in the year 2000. So we have one or two groups that are over 23 years old. And that's really interesting because in our own group, 2 men from the original group are still here. So we've been in Omni for 23 years, long time. As a psychologist, I must say that psychology has caught up with the practice that was first started by COTA way back then. And good mental health is associated with participation in small groups. Well, what does Omni mean? Older men, new ideas. Well, the older men part of it is 50 and upwards, although most of the 50-year-olds nowadays are working, so they are unable to come to our meetings, which are taking place on a weekday. So we've got an average age of, I suppose, about 70 or 80, and we have a number of men in the 90s and one turned 100. So we're at the top end, if you like, of that age group. So it's older men, new ideas, but what are the new ideas? Well, a lot of them are the ideas that, or the basic ideas, I suppose, are the ones established by COTA way back in 1996, when they decided to create a fellowship of older men who help one another to come to grips with issues of living, and that was their purpose. So the new ideas, however, that we like to espouse are in particular making connections in small groups, not ordinary connections, but connections that are very meaningful to people. We promote sharing, and that's quite a unique thing for men's groups, where people share their issues of concern in a situation in which there was safety and trust, confidence and self-awareness. Loneliness then becomes dispersed, if you like, in those kinds of situations as men feel belonging to the group. So the second major idea, new idea, is sharing. The third one is one that's rather unusual, and that's developing listening skills. Men don't listen, you know. They talk to one another. You go to the pub and you sit down and you hear men talking to one another, but not talking with one another. So that women, of course, talk with one another incessantly. But nevertheless, that's not one of their problems. So listening is a skill that men have to learn. It's interesting, after you've declared some particular issue that's been of concern to you, and someone says, "What can I do to help?" That's a marvelous response to receive when you have a particular issue that is troubling you. It's people forget what you say, you know, but they remember how you make them feel. That's the thing I think that we need to keep in mind. I think another new idea is the development of competence in communicating feelings. People have to learn to become competent in expressing their feelings in ways in which other people can understand them. Well, you could ask the question, at least I hope you'd ask the question, who joins Omni groups? Well, I don't know the answer to that, because everybody seems to join Omni groups, except that they're all male. We opened a new group just recently, and I gave a little talk about depression and the kind of painful process that I had gone through in depression some years ago. And one of the men there said, "Well, do you have to be depressed to belong to an Omni group?" And before I could get an answer out, someone else said, "No, but it helps." I think depression is painful, and they'll come to see that. But where do we get our members from? Well, we get our members from friends who invite other friends, but we also have a lot of our men are referred by family members, daughters and wives particularly, and social workers and occasional psychologists. But we find a predominance amongst referees are daughters and wives. And it's interesting that wives say that when the men get home after Omni, they've got a smile on their face. And I think that's an important thing. It's interesting that many of our men are war children and depression children. They were raised during the latter stages of the war, and they certainly experienced as children the problems of depression, that's economic depression. And these have had a lasting effect on the men. There's a whole psychology of war depression and war experiences that you could tap into, but that makes a lot of difference than they have, particularly to economic matters. Another feature of their early life was the emancipation of women, not often reported about, but something that as children and early adults, they had to deal with the fact that mothers were workers, not only in the home, but in the factory. And the whole scale of balance of responsibilities changed during their early childhood. And of course, they're coping with that as they get older. So that's another issue that our men face. One of the features that's really interesting is that in country towns, a lot of our members are farmers or ex-farmers. They have sold their farm and they're cash rich and come and buy a nice house in the town, but they've lost all their friends. They become disconnected, and they don't have the routines that the farm experience gives them to provide an order in their lives, and of course they have no friends. So numerous situations arise with those people in country towns where they have completely disconnected. That's an issue that allows us to have one particular Omni group that has a majority of farmers in it. They talk the same language to one another, trying to capture the experiences they've had and to share those and to overcome this disconnection. As far as city people are concerned, a lot of our men have been in the same job for right through their working life, and they develop a kind of tunnel vision, which is built on the idea of starting at the bottom and working up, getting promotion until finally it's retirement. And what a terrible situation retirement is. There's a strong sense of grieving. There are all sorts of grievings that people can have, but the loss of job and contacts and people dependent upon oneself, these kind of things suddenly stop, and people have to cope with that, so that that retirement becomes difficult for those people. They grieve and they tend to be lonely. I like to make a difference between loneliness and isolation. Isolation is where you're separate from people, usually physically, and loneliness is really a state of mind, so that you can be isolated and yet not lonely. A number of people can live by themselves quite happily and not be emotionally lonely. And then again, you can be lonely within a large group of people. So there are different kinds of relationships between those two. Well, how do you start these Omni groups? I mean, it's all very well to talk about the importance of small group experiences to overcome loneliness, but how do you kick these off? I shouldn't say kick these off. I've been watching the Matildas, and I really feel excited about what's going to happen tonight. But anyway, let's look at what you do to set up an Omni group. Well, first of all, you talk to the newspapers and the local radio station and all those publicity, and tell them what you're going to do or what you'd like to do. Then you contact all the groups. Now, you make a point of contacting groups which have female memberships, like the CWA, Country Women's Association, because, as I mentioned before, a lot of your memberships are going to come by referrals from husbands and daughters, from wives and daughters who put their husbands out. All right, so then you establish a little working party, making it clear that those people who are on the working party will be there for a very short time, because once the working party has done its job, it's finished. So you get people participating under those kind of circumstances. Then you run a public meeting, and you get Rotary, if you can, to try and support the morning tea or the afternoon tea. And in that public meeting, a lot of men will come, men who've been nominated by their wives and daughters. And then out of that group, you have maybe 7 or 8, maybe 10 or 12 men who are prepared to meet at a future date and meet fortnightly and form an Omni group. Now, we've just done that just a few months ago in Temora. We did the same thing in West Warlong last year and in Holbrook last year, and we established groups in those places. They meet fortnightly usually, but one of the groups in Wagga decided that they wanted to meet more often. So they formed a weekly coffee group, and every Wednesday morning they have coffee together. Coffee together for men is a new thing, really. Women meet for coffee lots, and that's a pretty common thing, but it's only comparatively recently that men have met together for coffee, but it's really a very good thing. I make a comment now about the policies, social welfare policies, which seem to be emphasising keeping older people at home by providing all sorts of supports, cleaning and washing and meals and so on, to help people stay in their home. And that's really a very good thing. But you need also to help people not stay in their home. In other words, you need to make provision at the same time for men to get out and meet people, to join small groups. That's really important. And if you don't, what happens is that you're supporting people in their homes until they get to such stage that they really need very advanced care. So when they move into aged care facilities, they're going to move into the facilities which demand advanced aged care. So there's unsuspected consequences for that kind of policies. Well, what do we do in Omni groups? You probably asked that question. Well, I hope you'd ask that question. What do you do in Omni groups? Well, most of them, Omni groups have got the benefit that people who've been working in jobs, the same sorts of jobs for years and years, are really sick of the hierarchy and the authority and the chairmanships and secretaryships and so on. They don't want that sort of framework. That's really something they want to get away from. They're tired of it. So what we do is we have a facilitator who changes from time to time, and everybody gets a chance if possible. People are not going to be made secretary of the group because they're scared of that. They don't want to do that particular thing. We sit in a circle so that there's no one more important than others, and everybody can see one another. We start the meeting off by a handshake with everybody. Then we have a quiet time. I think that's really important in order to have people settle down and think about what they're going to be sharing. Then we start two types of sharing: a confidential sharing where people can talk about things that mustn't go outside the group and people mustn't interrupt. They say what they have to say and that's it. No one comments. Then we have another type of sharing in which people talk about what they've done over the last 2 weeks since the last meeting, and that's interesting to everybody. The morning tea follows, and we prolong the morning tea because often there are matters that people have brought up in their sharing that they would like to talk one-to-one to other people, or some people have got a similar experience to them and want to share it. We don't give advice in Omni groups, but we certainly listen and we recount our own parallel experiences that we have had. Then we have a discussion topic, which can be anything. It can be about our first car, our first driving license, the changes we've noticed in our immediate vicinity over the last 20 years or whatever. And then we finish in a rather strange way. We all stand, we all clasp hands and have a mantra of thanks for sharing, thanks for caring, keep coming back. And we all say that and we finish. It's important to beginning a meeting and have an end to a meeting rather than just have people wander off. You need a finishing thing. Sometimes the sharing generates deep feelings of usually of depression, and this seems to captivate others so that you have one person who starts sharing and the others comment in the same vein. So you have a morning in which people really express feelings that they've not expressed before, and this becomes a very powerful influence on the members. And it doesn't happen all the time. It happens from time to time, and it gives a great sense of achievement, I think, to the people who are involved there. We have jokes, of course, sometimes the same jokes week after week, but never mind, we have that, and we sometimes have a newsletter. We remember birthdays and we visit each other in hospital, and we have all of those kind of things that are so important. We have a number of men whose wives have been in aged care facilities, and we decided that we would try Omni in an aged care facility, and we did this for over a period of 5 years. The men really had no programs that they could feel they could engage in. And the women seemed to have lots of things they could do, and of course most of the staff in these aged care facilities are women anyway, and so there was an uncertainty as to what could be done with the men. So we started a men's group, and the men started to remember the names of the other men who were there, and they engaged in activities that were new to them. We had ball and hoop games, but the big thing that was important was the singing. Singing has been shown to be very valuable for pre-dementia people, and it was wonderful amongst the men. They remembered the tune, not the words, but they remembered the tune. So they would participate with gusto, and the authorities in the home actually came to me once and said, look, you talk about things that are pretty confidential, so it would be good if you had a room of your own. And I thought, well, that sounds a very good thing. And then I realized afterwards what they were doing was they cutting off the noise, because I think most of the staff would go off duty when we started singing. That was a terrific experience. But those groups were important because they sparked off connections amongst the members that they hadn't had before, especially people who'd been raised locally, and those connections and the reminiscing was really important for them. In actual fact, the group became so important that men from other aged care organisations came and visited the meetings that we had. We gave up those meetings when the organisation itself said that they would carry them on, and of course they do. Well, just to finish, I want to look at this aspect of loneliness because, as I've said, the solution to loneliness is participation in small groups. They've got to be small. You can't have groups that are very large, where people take a long time to get to know other people, and where it's frightening to belong. So there are side effects of loneliness, and such as mental health difficulties, and we've noticed loneliness associated with poor personal care, poor personal diet, and low general well-being, and these things improve as people manage their loneliness, getting over it. And social groups have what I would call a kind of protective effect, because it's in those groups that members have similar problems and goals that they deal with, and they can test their relevant skills, such as the skill of listening that I mentioned before, and competence in sharing. They've got to learn that. And the group, of course, is a source of supportive people. So all of those things make groups good. One-on-one relationships for people who are lonely are not so successful as memberships in groups. And we go for people of a similar age. Older men really means 60, 70, 80, around that level. When you get men together of that age becomes irrelevant. People don't talk about, I can't do this because I'm too old, or I've lost the power to remember things because I'm too old. People in our groups don't say that, and this is really a positive thing, because once you start attributing your condition to old age, then the health resources that you're going to use are quite different from the kind of resources you'll use if you say to yourself, well, I've got this memory loss, must be sick, I must have some particular medical problem. Let me go to the doctor and find out, or the psychologist or psychiatrist, and find out what the cause is. Now, that's a different kind of response than people who say, who attribute their kind of condition to old age and therefore do nothing about it. So the attitude towards aging is really very important. So same age groups make that age difference really irrelevant. They avoid that self-fulfilling prophecy you get when you attribute everything to old age. So group membership really has a positive effect on all things, on health, on mental health, on well-being, but it's not just any group. And I think that's got to be remembered. It's got to be a group where you identify with others and share with others, where you're safe, where there's a situation of confidence and trust, where you have a strong connection when you want to be a member. Some group memberships are damaging, let's face it. There some are ones that you need to get out of rather than stay with. Omni meets all these criteria for combating loneliness or disconnection. Omni is where men become mates. It's very important to have small group responsibilities and joys of membership. We have a video of an Omni group meeting on the COTA website. You really need to have a look at, because we have there a farmer who is talking about the very things that I've mentioned, about coming to the town and not having any friends and lacking the routines and the structure that helped him enjoy his life as a farmer. That video's on the COTA website. And also there's a guidelines book about Omni groups there as well. I'd like to thank COTA actually for the opportunity to talk about something that is pretty close to my heart, which is the setting up and operating of Omni groups. So thank you very much.
Ray, thank you sincerely. I just had forgotten that history. It goes back such a long time when you acknowledged COTA New South Wales starting off the group in 1996. And many people out there wouldn't realise that COTA, of course, we're old as well. I think we're into our 66th year. So it's sometimes a sadness to me, because we start off some good services that are really important to older people, and then something happens, we get no more funding, and of course over the years that funding has got it has shrunk, and so it's quite difficult. However, saying that, we are a great believer in a lot of volunteers who are connected to COTA New South Wales, and we think now that people are at certain stages in their life, they want to actually become very active in the last stage of their life. So Ray, the other thing that I thought was really important is that you said some of the older men, their comment about how the impact of Omni is how you make me feel. And I think that's a really important result of an Omni group. And for wives saying their husbands, partners walk in with a smile on their face, and you can't underestimate that sort of power of connection. When you were talking about the Omni in aged care facilities, it made me reflect on my dear old father, who actually died in an aged care facility. And when I'd say to him, "Dad, how are you?" the common theme was, "Sweetheart, the days are so long," because he had no connection with anyone. He needed a lot of physical care. He was in his 90s, but he really lacked that social connection. All he wanted was someone to sit and have a chat. And he could still tell dirty jokes, right? So if you're
Here are a few of them.
if the men in your group are sharing jokes, and you'd always know when my father was going to tell a dirty joke, because his eyes would light up, and that one-liner it still came out even at 93. Ray, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Someone just asked a question about whether you've got people who English isn't their first language, people from cultural backgrounds. Do they find it easy to join Omni? Do you have people in your groups that do come from cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds?
Yes, we do. 3 Dutchmen we have, and that's interesting in itself, because they are war children. They were living in the Netherlands under Nazi occupation, and their life as kids was so different that it's an eye-opener to all of us. And that's really one of the features of Omni. Anybody can come, and friends ask friends, and so on. So we have that. We don't have any Indigenous members at all. We have had Indigenous members come and speak to us, which is a really good thing. And but we don't have any members.
And when you talked about how an Omni group does its activities, as in sitting in a circle and keeping that group small, I really thought just the pattern of beginning, sharing, and then having a conclusion. I think that's really important. And for some First Nations men, that would be a really comfortable model, I think.
Yes.
Yes, you know, that's sort of what they call the Koori yarning model. Yeah, and often sitting on the ground is another way that some First Nations men like to get together. Just notice everyone on the chat, as Ray's been working with a worker at COTA New South Wales, his name is Luke, and Luke's put up a little message there. We're trying to set up Omni groups in other areas through the model that Ray has so well outlined this morning. So you can contact Luke Curtis at cotanewsouthwales.com.au. And Luke is a young man, but he's actually been so inspired by Ray's absolute commitment around men's health. So it's a good connection of an older man and a younger man. What do you think, Ray?
Oh, not much older.
All right, let's
working on it.
Let's get into some questions that I think really important. What do you think, Jasmine, about trying to encourage people regarding their health and well-being? And you outlined some of the barriers. So let's have a little bit more of a conversation about those barriers. And I think Ray also brought up an interesting issue in the gender about trying to get men to increase their listening skills, because it's something that some men haven't been used to in their life. And also, I think some discussion around that loss that people feel as they get older, leaving the paid workforce, losing friends, losing partners, sometimes thinking the solution is relocating, and then they find it really hard to make friends. So, Jasmine, just a little bit of a conversation about those barriers I think would be useful for everyone.
Yes, absolutely. And so I'm really, really glad that Ray raised that point about listening. So that's very much part of that conversation, communication strategies that I think it's also very, very important as part of that addressing the barriers. And so, in fact, you know, in some of the conversations that we have with older adults, you know, we encourage them to think about in terms of communication, not just what you say, what you communicate, the message you try to communicate, but also how you communicate your message and also how you listen. I think that's a really important. And often a lot of older adults will say to us, of course I listen, you know, I heard what they're saying, but does the other person know how you received a message? You know, so sometimes where it can be helpful to check in with our expectations and also how we're interpreting in terms of the how the message that we try to convey has been received and understood by the other person, and vice versa. Does the other person know that we've actually received the message? Okay, so, you know, that's usually one of the conversations that we would have about really thinking about not just checking in your managing your expectations, your interpretations, but also checking in terms of, you know, trying to review the communication strategies that you've been using, whether they have been helpful for maintaining your friendships, and particularly thinking about that quality, the more sort of deeper connections that we all yearn for, you know, in our social connections. You know, the communication strategies are a very big part of that. And so often, you know, just listening to Ray's presentation, two things also really stood out to me in terms of managing our expectations and also building that confidence in ourselves, in our ability to reach out, connect to another human being, and also thinking about how to sort of manage our expectations from in the initial stage, because as you know, Joan, you pointed out, you know, a lot of older adults have lived a long life. You know, a lot of the friendships that, you know, they have built over their lifetime, you know, that those are history, right? They take time to build those lifelong friendships. And so, of course, you know, whatever new friendships they built in the older adulthood may not necessarily be the same as, some of these lifelong friendships they've built. But this is where it really can be helpful to think about, having a diverse level of friendships. So you're not just sort of only drawing, getting your social needs from one or two selected, lifelong connections, which are, of course, meaningful and important. But the tricky thing often, as Joan, you said, that when we start sort of losing some of our friends and loved ones through, say, people downsizing, moving away, or through death, so those are the things that, we really want to sort of think about in terms of adjusting, coping, adapting to the changes. And that's where, I guess, the space that we try to fill in from a psychologist perspective, to think about the barriers that might be there for some people to adapting to these changes. Mm-hmm. So I guess the key point also is to think about starting early. Don't leave it until older adulthood to start thinking about, how do I practice to make new friends?
Yes. And I think the lifespan approach that your centre's doing is really important, because at every stage where your life changes, if you can be a little prepared for the next bit, whatever that might be, it does really help with those transition pressures that some people are under. And I think for some of our older people at the moment, we've got many things that are impacting on their health and well-being, like poverty, especially for older women, like the things that we've talked about, loss and grief that comes with just changing from paid work to non-paid work. So you do need to, you do need to think about those transition periods, which often happen if you take a long approach to it, like a lifespan approach. I think is important. Ray, you talked about how men don't have those sort of listening skills that some women do, and we often develop those skills over time, because as my husband would say, she can talk under wet cement, because I've spent my life, my career, and my volunteer work now talking a lot. So you develop those talking skills and you develop those active listening skills. But so the men that come into the group where you were saying they don't have good listening skills, do you see that increasing over time? How can you see them improving their listening skills? Is it because of the group? Is it because they feel comfortable and confident in the group?
I think it is. I think the age structure has a lot to do with it, because it doesn't intrude. Whereas when older people are talking with younger people, the age difference does intrude. A lot of our men can't understand their grandchildren's attitudes and their culture, if you like. They have even difficulty, I think, understanding their children's, their own children's new ideas. And I think that coming to grips with that is quite a difficult issue for our people. I think for my own philosophy, I believe that there are two things that are important in our life on this world, and one of them is awareness, and the other one is improvement. I think that people becoming aware of themselves, their own experiences, their effects on others, the nature of the world, and so on, that's really something that's very important in life, this awareness. And then it's one thing to be aware, but another thing is to progress, and which is to improve. And it seems to me that those two things are basic to the whole Omni program, and in fact, as a kind of message for life that seems to me, anyway, to be two important things. That's probably just a personal thing, but it underpins the kind of work we're doing in Omni groups.
Mm-hmm. And this, either of you could answer this. A person has just you can both have a look at it, but a family member wants her to move closer to him. She's currently from the Central Coast in New South Wales, to move to the Wollongong area, and she feels like she will lose all her supports, her friends, etc. And she worries how she would make new friends in the area. So I think, we talked about different groups that people can join. So it's a woman, Ray, but anyway, you'd probably have a bit of a sense in your community where people can go to find new groups. And Jasmine, you mentioned a whole lot of resources like local government, local councils, I think, are a great hub of information around what groups people can join. But I do think also it's sometimes hard, isn't it? You have to just find one or two people that you can connect with. Someone else has said, go walking, you'll find people in parks. Another idea I have is not that you would do this, but I've got a few friends who've decided to buy a dog. They're by themselves, and you wouldn't believe a dog introduces you to all sorts of people. You're walking the dog and you talk to people, and one of my close friends, she married. She's just married the guy. Like, they were there in their 60s and 70s, and she met the guy walking his dog. She was walking her dog, and there we go. They got married a couple of years ago. But it is hard, isn't it, when you go to a new area? So a few ideas from either of you or both of you, that would be great. Ray, do you want to start?
Well, I hesitate to make any kind of comment about what women should do. But,
Go ahead.
if they're in a rural area, the Country Women's Association is a very important source of contact, and that gives terrific support. Probus, of course, can be also, but progress groups are big groups, and it may not be so easy to become installed in a big group. I think small groups are what you should aim for, and often neighbours can put you in that direction, where neighbours, if they've been in the area for some time, have been involved with all sorts of activities, and they can be a source of introduction, if you like, to small groups. It always helps in going into groups to have someone to go with, someone that can help break the ice and introduce you, and you can feel secure with. So I think those kind of groups. Also, there are a lot of other kinds of groups depending on the background. Musical groups. A lot of people, a lot of women join choirs, and that provides. Dr. Chen talked about mastery, and that's something that people have a wish to participate in singing activities, but never feel that they can have the cheek, if you like, to join a choir. But there are a lot of choirs you can join that don't have tests to see how well you can sing, and you can just join and participate, and they're the ones that I think are pretty useful as well. But,
yeah, I think just on that one, I just can't remember the name, but there's a woman who started up choirs in pubs, and I think it's a big movement around Sydney suburbs. And of course, you obviously don't need to do a singing test. You just show up, and someone conducts you, and you just sing along, and then I suppose you might have a beer or a wine after you've finished or whatever. I think so. It's something, I think singing again, if that's something that you're really interested in, and or you might have lost that skill, and music, I think, is a great it's a great nurturer of the soul, I think. Jasmine, what other activities do you think to give to this person who's moving? Well, she's thinking of moving from the Central Coast to Wollongong.
Yeah, so I have a few quick points to make. So firstly, just on the meet cute story, Joan, that you mentioned about the lady who married the husband, on her dog walking trip. I should also mention, I know that a lot of dog rescue organisations are currently actually looking for volunteers to just have for some of the dogs, and also the Guide Dog Association looking for volunteers to host some of the dogs that they're training for just a short period of time. So this could be a great opportunity for people who are not ready to commit to having a dog, as their own just yet. This could be a really nice stepping stone. So that goes back to part of the small steps that I was talking about in my presentation, overcoming that anxiety about taking on new responsibility. My two other thoughts is that, and it's really important, as Dr. King mentioned, into the reaching out to the new groups and, in a new neighborhood. But I often also think about how we can draw strength from our existing connections of where you are now. So, for example, you might even reach out to some of the friends or neighbors in your current neighborhood if they can actually connect you with anyone they might know in the area that you're thinking about moving to. So that could be a great way of building that new connections whilst you're maintaining that existing connection. And the other point I will make is that, going back to the whole idea of scheduling activities, keeping engaging regular activities. Sometimes I think this is a great example to sort of challenging us to think about changing the way we're maintaining that connection, in terms of how often. Again, if we're thinking about quality, not just frequency, it can't, if, you maintain the contact with some of your existing networks where you are now, maybe on a bi-monthly basis, that can still be very meaningful interactions to have with them, even though, you might not see them face to face as often as you currently do. And this is also a really great example to highlight the use of technology as a way to maintain those connections in between the less frequent face-to-face contact.
Yes, great points. Thank you very much. And as we all get older, folks out there, don't leave it for too late. Not so I say time's running out, but I've just turned a certain age this year and I think, oh my goodness, how did I get so old so quickly? And then I think, we've got limited time and you want to be able to do those things that make you happy, that make you feel good about your existence and your life, and connecting with people is one way of doing that. And to also increase our health and well-being, as Ray said, and, there's a lot of research around people's connection and how that impacts on their health and well-being, and therefore they don't need to go to a GP and get all sorts of other things that you don't want to rely on for those last years in your life. For example, things that help with mental health, as in pills. Not that I'm saying there is a place for that, but I think connecting with people is a fantastic way of keeping your health and well-being healthy. All right, well, it's getting close to the end, but I just hope that everyone out there has enjoyed this webinar as much as I have in facilitating it. And we've had just two fantastic speakers, different approaches, but some really good hints. So Ray, I thank you sincerely. I thank you for your ongoing work around Omni. And I thank you, Jasmine. It's lovely to meet you and also to see your ongoing commitment to older people regarding health and well-being. Just as I said, if people have any problems, if it's bringing up any issues, just remember that you can call Lifeline on 11 14, and don't feel shy about doing that, because sometimes these topics bring up all sorts of emotions for people, and if you haven't got someone to talk that through, Lifeline will help you with that. So our next webinar is going to be, we usually run them in the last week of each month. So our next one is towards the end of August. Just make sure that you look out for emails and connections from COTA New South Wales in terms of the topic. Some